Greetings, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Driving Productive IT Investments with Business Capabilities. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. A brief question and answer session will follow the formal presentation. Please submit your questions using the WebEx chat feature. Names and companies will remain anonymous. If anyone should require operator or technical assistance during the call, please press star 0 on your telephone keypad. As a reminder, this conference is being recorded. It is now my pleasure to introduce your speaker, Dr. Uli Kalix. Thank you, Doctor. You may now begin.
Thank you, Christian. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. As we are nearing, hopefully at least, nearing the bottom of the current financial crisis, companies are starting to look at important investment proposals again. In this context, the real question or challenge is how to separate the important from the unimportant ones. Business capability management has in numerous situations proven its success in identifying business areas of strategic relevance and importance. We will be dedicating our webinar today to the subject of business capabilities. What are these? How can one manage them? How can they be leveraged in IT portfolio and investment management? I'm very happy to welcome Bobby Cameron, Research VP with Forrester, and known as an expert in strategic IT management in general and business capability management in particular. Bobby has, in fact, been one of the first to write reports and analysis on the subject of business capability management, starting back in 2007. Bobby is covering the first part, explaining what business capabilities are and in which decision context business capabilities can be leveraged. In the second part, I will be focusing more on the practical side and be sharing some of the experience Alphabet customers have gained in adopting business capability management. With this, I'm handing it off to Bobby.
Great, thanks, Uli, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the telephone call, and I noticed we're actually gone back a month. We're in June, so hang with us here while we move forward from June to July, and we'll be talking in this first part about the utility of capability maps. It's a different phenomenon than a lot of firms are used to using in terms of modeling the business and being able to relate it to the technology. So to build that perspective, what I'll do is I'll talk about the context for needing a new tool. What is it that keeps IT-based investments from being more productive? Why is there something missing? What is it? And then I'll talk about how firms are using the business capability modeling to move beyond these limitations. So it'll be a specific context for this. So if we start looking at the perspective of what the problems are in IT business conversation, there are lots of language that's used depending on the problem that's being addressed. But typically the business processes are highly discrete. They're too detailed for a strategic kind of a view in order to understand large-scale opportunities, maybe related to funding or business change or, as Uli points out, driving maximum productivity out of investments during the downturn. A process level is typically way too discrete. If you take the conversation from a business and IT strategy perspective or projects, they tend to be more variable. They change a lot. They also can be pretty narrow in the case of projects, or in case of strategies, way too broad. So they make it a challenge. Applications are functionally isolated, too technical, frequently relating only to maybe an organization-specific view of what is going on. And finally, the businesses have a hard time being able to track issues around technology costs and how they relate to business value in any of these contexts, processes, strategies, functionality, any of these pictures. So in looking around for ways companies are addressing this whole set of problems, Forrester came up against this what we found called business capability maps, and these work as a Rosetta Stone, if you will, in terms of translating between these two perspectives. They provide a view of capabilities, which, as I'll show you in a minute, is a reasonably high-level point of view, but with enough detail to relate them across the capabilities, across functions and organizations, across business processes, across the technology stack. And it allows, therefore, for the ability to translate among all these different perspectives and be productive in their use. Now, defining the capability is an interesting challenge. In fact, just before the call started, Uli and I were having a discussion about the word and how capabilities have sort of generic interpretations as well as interpretations that reflect individual specific efforts. Forrester chose to, when we were doing the research a couple of years ago, to stay with the phrase capability because we did find users employing that phrase. Accenture has a practice in delivering capability modeling that seemed to have some grounding in the use that we were trying to make of it. But the flip side is it wasn't so hackneyed a term that it carried a lot of baggage. So business architecture, which, as I'll show you a little bit later, is really where this fits. Business architecture has lots and lots of different meanings depending on what companies are doing, how long they've been at it, etc. So here's a representation of the definition. The capability is really the capacity of an organization to perform unique activities. So they're building blocks. They represent stable functions. They tend to be unique and independent from each other, though obviously interrelated. Abstracted from the organizational model. They capture what the business cares about. And in fact, when people say, my customers say, how do I find a business capability? I say, so what does the business measure? What is it that they track? And how does that relate to specific things that the business has to do? And we'll show you some examples. Now, turning this capability concept into a map is about associating the capabilities. So that's the high-level unique activity, tying that together with the key processes at a high level that support it, the functions required to make it work, and functions tend to parallel organizational structures, and then drilling down below that into the IT resources, hardware, software, and IT services that support them. So with that capability, let's put a little meat on the bones. Here's a generic mapping for a manufacturing company of business capabilities, and you can see that this is a very high-level statement. So there are only 10 pieces here. That's the relative size that we see pretty consistently in the range 8 to 12 that firms have. And when I say firms, we've seen evidence of this use in manufacturers, services companies, and governmental agencies. So it's pretty much across the board. Now, with this kind of a modeling, this is the first level. Then we take each of these capabilities and we start to see them decomposed, if you will, into elements. And the three boxes along the top of that piece that just showed up, sales processes, sales functions, and information subjects are the primary level at which things are done. Bear in mind that, for instance, the processes are not defined at a level where you could go out and code and build something. They're much more the ability to recognize high-level sets of processes. So prospecting for a sales capability is a reasonably well-understood process, but it's certainly not going to be deep enough in terms of definition that you can go out and build it out yourself. Functions, as I mentioned, tend to reflect the organizational structure. So call center, for instance, a great example. The function of running the call center tends to be related to the organization. Processes will tend to flow across functions, so keep that in mind, that these are not a mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive set of decomposition. These are key elements that help us carry on a conversation between IT and business, because remember, that's really what the orientation here is. And the information subjects start to bring forward the the technology element to help us start to see how this breaks out into the technology stack. Now, finally, in this picture at the very bottom, you see the key sales goals and metrics. I mentioned before that a good way to identify a capability is where there are metrics, and here's an example of what you'll find for sales. Now, why do we have these metrics? Well, if you start to ask questions like, what's the core value of the capability? Well, here's what the business thinks. If we start to ask questions as we see the technology stack laid out, how does the technology relate to business capabilities and the value of those capabilities? Well, gee, here we have the value statement expressed in terms of what the business does, and as we decompose these processes and functions and information subjects into the technologies, we'll see that we now can link back up to what the business cares about. We can link those technologies. So this first picture is the business side, starting with the capabilities and working down. Next, we look at the from this piece, which by the way is as I mentioned before, is a key piece of what a lot of companies begin to work on from a business architecture perspective. But if we now take that, and in this case we're working through the sales capability, and start looking at the bill of IT, if you will, for those of you in the manufacturing sector, you know the phrase bill of materials, which is the list of the elements that go into, or components that go into a finished product. Well, that's exactly what we're looking at here. Bill of IT is the set of technologies, hardware, software, IT services, third-party services, whatever it is that goes in to enable the capability. And how do you figure out that relationship? Well, the technologies typically are going to be bought based on function, because usually an organization buys these things, and that's what creates the market. Or they'll be built around functional elements to carry business processes. So whether you buy an integrated system like an SAP or a J.D. Edwards and automate processes in that, or you have bought pieces and built your own pieces, the processes tend to span multiple functions and organizations, and all of those tend to be instantiated today in some sort of technology. And so it's that mapping is where we get into the IT element. And I mentioned before, I just wanted to emphasize it again in this picture, that the recognition of the technology stack's relationship to the goals and metrics is where we get a very clear notion of what the value of IT is, what for the operational budget, what it is that generates value. So now, building these out is not necessarily a big project. Some companies have tackled it that way. Most build it through an iterative process, and as you can see, there's really no start and stop point in this cycle shown on the slide. Typically, you start with a template, not unlike something that resembles what I showed on the prior pages, and you build or refine that template, validating what you're doing with the business. A lot of times, firms will focus on a very specific problem. Problem might have to do maybe with an operation, so a bank customer was working on branch operations and wanted to understand the capability of branch operations. That's maybe down a tick from the layer or level we were looking at before. So it's a bit more discrete than a lot of them do. But what it did is drove that group then to test with the business what were the processes and functions that needed to run there, and that was a iterative cycle with the business, and then based on that, populating the model with the detail, drilling down into the technology stack as part of that, validating it again with the business, and refining that view. And as a consequence, it allowed that IT organization to start having a very good conversation about complexity of the technologies that were in place to support the branch operations, how there was redundancy, key information elements showed up in lots of different systems that were used by different functions. That detail of mapping, even though it's still high level, that much detail allows for a very coherent statement of, gee, you got the same data in a bunch of systems. Where do you want the primary storage to be, or should we maybe design that as a future effort, some way to rationalize or clear that up? Now, in that example of how these things drive iteratively, I've mentioned a handful ways that this model can be used. Let me get a bit more specific about that, and I'll walk through four ways in particular. The way the frameworks and the Bill of IT helps cut through this complexity of IT to business communication, performs this Rosetta Stone function. And I'm going to speak from IT point of view. There are multiple ones for the business as well, and I'll speak to those toward the end. The first one is a classic one, rationalizing applications and processes across the functions and firms. Notice that this is not only internal to one company. It could be multiple companies. It also is very useful for spanning the same function in multiple organizations in a single company. And when you're doing that rationalization, you're working at a pretty high level, trying to understand where there's duplicated capability or where there is a need for additional. So a situation might be a merger or an acquisition, looking for a high-level analysis of where it is that projects need to be launched to drill into the detail of where the functionality is probably overlapping, where it may or may not make sense to have it duplicated, and start making some decisions about how to get rid of the duplications, how to take advantage of the synergies. And so I'm not going to work through examples just because of time of all the pieces here, but you can see the kinds of things we're looking at. The second approach to using capability maps that I'm going to talk to today is about designing and delivering agile technology solutions. This one is of particular interest coming out of the downturn. We see firms who are looking forward to taking advantage of global opportunities as a way to accelerate out of the downturn. It's trying to identify areas in which they can build out SOA technology to provide easier interface to partners. Maybe that some of their business partners are struggling or maybe even shut down as a result of the recession, so that they might need to take advantage of others more rapidly. Plus, a lot of companies are looking to markets. Obviously, China, India is stumbling a little bit, but still a lot healthier than a bunch of other markets. So they might be looking at the SOA interfaces as a way to go to market in geographies where they may not be already, to go to market quickly with partnerships. So the SOA might, being able to look at the capability maps and think about key processes that might be sourced from or interconnected with third parties. This is a wonderful way to handle that. They are very useful from an as-is and to-be kind of analysis, so that you can see the details and see how they are laid out. The third approach is relative to dealing with the business value, and I pointed that out a minute ago. Forrester calls the operational budget the MOOS, that's maintenance and ongoing operation and services expense. In other words, all the mostly expense budget and some capital budget, all the expenses that are or expenditures that are tied to the Bill of IT. And by relating a specific slice of the technology into the core business values, those metrics we saw in the prior slides, what we end up with is the ability of IT to discuss what the IT spend is that's related to key activities. My favorite example is it's a real simple example. All of the IT organizations and business organizations have worked out what the key value proposition is for the technology use, and IT tracks its cost in terms of those key values. For institutional investment, which is a cost-sensitive trading business, it's really the cost of a trade that business tracks. They consider that to be a primary competitive issue. And so since it's principally IT-based, IT tracks its bill of IT to drive a trade, and therefore you end up with a very relevant conversation between the business and IT leadership. The business comes in and says, hey, can we knock 25 cents off the cost of trade? It's not IT, you're too expensive. It's let's knock 25 cents off the cost of trade because Schwab or whoever maybe has taken a move in the market and is pushing the cost down. And then the conversation can go to, okay, so what constitutes the cost of a trade? Well, let's see. There's service levels, so we're maintaining CPU utilization at low enough percentage that we don't max out during peak periods. We've got the online storage required to drive transactions. We've got that optimized for throughput. But look at this. We're keeping 3 years worth of historical data around trades and businesses and how they're performing. But if we look at the utilization levels, it's only the last 6 to 9 months that really get heavy use. So instead of having it all online and immediately available, why don't we push 2 years' worth off to slower storage, and we can guarantee you online availability of that in a high-speed medium within 2 hours of a request, or people can use it in a slower environment, and we can save better than 25 cents a transaction. So now we've had a very clear conversation related to business value, and the whole set of thinking driven by being able to relate the MOOS, the IT expenses, the bill of IT, for the key business capability or the key business metric that's associated with the capability of executing a trade. Now, the last element here I'm going to emphasize is using the business capability map to resolve IT services into organizations and functions. A lot of work that IT does around change, configuration, incident management requires the ability of IT to understand what it is that the business is doing with the technology in case there's some sort of event that occurs or a planned event that needs to occur, and therefore business needs to be notified or some appropriate escalation. Now, that kind of content is maintained today independent of a lot of other activities. Maybe it's a part of a rollout or change management activity. It's updated, but there's no core map. And so if organizations change post-software production rollout, it might be missed. But if there's a dynamic capability map and it's iteratively updated as part of certain change management, so the rollout of new products and capabilities, but from a technical standpoint, but also as organizations change, if someone comes in and shifts the map and there's a dynamic link of that into the, or at least an event that drives an update of the core incident and configuration management types of environments, then you actually have a linkage that's much more alive and dynamic. So there's just a series of examples. There's a lot more we could talk about. I did actually have one more. I forgot I had 5 in here. The others helping drive demand management, and this is actually a very important one for the downturn context that we've been talking to. Specifically here, demand management is Forrester's language for IT working with the business to understand what it is the business is trying to do. It's a combination of investment requests and ongoing operational issues. So the capability maps support the analysis of what's being addressed. It supports the ability to analyze the portfolio for the appropriateness of the strategies. All of that are driven by the maps. And as mentioned before, the as-is and to-be capability allows for people to map out and have a discussion at a high level before there's even any code written. So it's a wonderful tool for driving that kind of strategic conversation. So, quick summary of what I've been through here. I've been talking about how capability maps answer questions that have been difficult to deal with in the past. Why does IT cost so much? Well, that for the expense budget has been a pretty generic question with either allocations or maybe at best organizational relationship between spend based on applications and users, but certainly not tied to what the business really cares about, the capabilities and the core details. What's the business value of being enabled, that's being enabled by the technology, by the spend? Well, if we've got the ability to recognize the capabilities, especially if the business has some metrics at that level, now we know. Now we can talk to it. And questions like, are we investing IT resources in the right areas? You can look across the whole corporation. You can see where there maybe is a dearth of automation or maybe there's confusing automation. It helps you develop a wider perspective on what's going on. Helps you look at project overlap when you're doing a portfolio analysis, particularly in a more loosely federated kind of a company. It helps you have a context in which to raise the issues around the portfolio. Don't have to go look at all the detail. If you're all using a common map process, you can relate to each other's capability models and have a quicker understanding of where there's overlap. And finally, a use that's being made increasingly is trying to identify where there's opportunity for shared service to help emphasize the commonality of capabilities, even in a loosely federated or distributed firm. Individual operations, a cement manufacturer who operates really at P&L level at the plant, has about 30 some odd plants that they coordinate, and the CIO takes a capability point of view and talks to the distributed IT organizations and helps them understand what everybody else is doing and what they're working on, and gets them to collaborate and cooperate based on, each plant level's own interest, but generates synergies and creates, in essence, common services, not necessarily shared services in that model. So hopefully that gives you a pretty good foundation. And now I'm going to pass the baton over to Uli to move from here and talk more in detail about some of the specific approaches companies are taking.
Hey, thanks, Bobby. Thanks a lot for this really interesting and vivid introduction into the subject. I'll certainly get back to a number of the key propositions that you have laid out here as I'm exploring the practical aspects of business capability management. In particular, I'd like to share with the audience how business capability management can be implemented in large and complex organizations, and the role that an IT planning and management solution like Planning IT plays in this context. We've seen what capabilities are, and I think we pretty well understood how to create a capability map and what they can be used for, means what results can be achieved. We need to now discuss how to get from the capabilities to those results, and this is actually described in the IT planning process. The IT plan is a result of a collaborative process that is typically executed between business and IT and involves all the relevant stakeholders from the lines of business and the IT itself. This collaborative process is centered around four key dimensions: strategy and demand providing the general direction, the enterprise architecture providing the understanding of the current situation and the intrinsic dependencies in the IT business relationship, the project portfolio as the plan of action that everyone has agreed upon, and finally the cost and budget as the economic frame that IT supports to the business has to stay within. IT planning is the process of concurrently and continuously managing the change along these four dimensions. Capability management plays an important role in all four of these aspects because it lays the foundation and decision guidelines for all of the planning sub-processes. For instance, evaluation of demands and proposals, architecture changes, or budgeting. Hence, I'll spend a bit of time shedding more light on each of these four dimensions. For the strategy and demand dimension, we want to understand how are business capabilities related to the business strategies, goals, and objectives? How is an improvement in the performance for a business capability helping the corporation to edge towards this strategic business objective? How, if at all, is the gap between current and required performance for the critical business capabilities reflected in the demands that are being discussed between business and IT? From these considerations, we'll make sure that the business perspective is included in the IT plan and that the hotspots for attention are clearly identified and, more importantly, communicated throughout the stakeholder community, so making sure that everyone is on the same page. Just having a map of business capabilities doesn't really suffice. What is required is an evaluation of business capabilities with regard to a consistent set of key performance measures. For any reasonably sized enterprise, this will have to follow a telescoping approach. Telescoping approach means I'm allowing to discuss business capability at finer granularity in areas that have turned out to be critical or instrumental in to achieving business objectives, and staying coarse or broad brush in areas that have little to no impact on achieving those goals. In the example that we see here, you can look, for instance, at market development and drill down to the level of direct marketing to see that direct marketing is a hotspot or a gap along the revenue contribution measure, which is one of the KPIs that are used to assess the business capabilities here. Looking at the enterprise architecture dimension means creating the bill of IT. Which IT solutions and systems are mapped to the critical business capabilities, the critical business capabilities that need improvement. It also means checking for the impact of changes and factoring the current health status of these architecture elements into the equation. What is the quality of support? How homogeneous or redundant is the support? How reliable or scalable is the technology used to providing that support to critical business capabilities? This allows avoiding adverse knock-on effects and results in higher predictability and reliability of the IT response to the intended business strategy. Taking an example here, we have a set of critical business capabilities at the top line of this chart. And I can show the connection to the business processes that are associated with these capabilities. And from there, I can further assess the supporting IT assets enabling these business processes. Obviously, for a comprehensive understanding of business IT alignment, one needs to also include the cost and budget dimension. How much are we spending on supporting critical or not so critical business capabilities through IT solutions? Where are these costs originating from? Can, for instance, in a downturn situation like the current, service level agreements be aligned to the actual business needs? For instance, following the reduction in transaction numbers that many businesses are experiencing these days, thus lowering the cost of support. These and similar questions allow reducing operational expenses without jeopardizing the enabled business capabilities. They reveal candidates for outsourcing initiatives, and they also hint to areas where cost of IT support is not aligned with the value derived from the enabled business capabilities. Finally, they open perspectives to opportunities for streamlining the IT support itself. Again, looking at an example here, this shows the drill down from first level to second level business capabilities. So first level at the horizontal in the top, the second level into the verticals, into the columns. The aim is at better understanding how IT costs are related to criticality of business capabilities. The size of the boxes in the columns indicate the cost of the IT support, and obviously the large boxes are taking the lion's share of cost here. This is combined with criticality, which is expressed as a color indicator here. Criticality of the business capabilities as derived from the business strategy alignment. Now, obviously, we can see that some of the not-so-critical business capabilities, like, for instance, product retirement or product development, and that is visible through the green color code used here, some of these business capabilities that are not so critical are still associated with considerably high costs. And that means these costs are not justifiable and are hinting to an area of action. Project proposals are mapped to business capabilities, And thus they are reflecting the strategic intention of business and aligning to the capability gaps which have to be closed for business to achieve its strategies and goals. It also allows for the identification of redundancies or conflicts and overlaps in the portfolio of projects, whether these are projects that are currently in discussion or projects that are already in execution doesn't really make a difference here. And hence it helps optimizing the project portfolio also in a situation of tight budgets like the current, where I have to revisit the portfolio on a regular basis to make sure that my spend levels or my investment spend levels continue to be aligned to the current situation. And all this allows and assures transparent decision making. So looking at an example here, we see business capabilities being ordered by criticality or by the gap in performance as being identified, and taking some of these capabilities I can directly relate to the portfolio of related projects. And these projects, as you can see, may either be in discussion or already in execution. With this, I'll now turn to the discussion of two customer examples demonstrating how these principles apply. One is a large multinational financial institution, and the other one is a globally operating telecommunications service provider. Interestingly enough, the goals that have been set out by these two companies almost perfectly match to the 5 use cases that Bobby had highlighted. So rationalizing applications and processes in lieu of criticality of associated business capabilities is one of these. Delivering agile technology solutions for business capabilities that are differentiating in the market is another one. A third one for this financial institution is the relating operational IT costs to business value of the supported business capabilities. And for the telecom service provider, the ability to relate IT services and quality of service to the actual needs of the business capabilities, and the management of demands in accordance with the business strategy and the capability gaps identified had been at the heart and core of this initiative. So looking more into the details of this financial services institution, the example shows the business capability map for this company. It shows it's a 3-level structuring, and in some areas they have taken the liberty to stay at first or second level, not going into more detail as required. The color coding indicates the prioritization that is being associated with these capabilities. And interestingly enough, the organization didn't have to build this capability map grounds up because they had actually a lot of this information already available in-house with business peers and have been complementing it with services from consulting organizations. Bobby had already mentioned Accenture as being one, IBM Global Services, Global Business Services would be another company that is specializing in this area. Now, the business architecture is used to support decisions around sourcing or further process automation and so on. Translating that business architecture into application and technical architecture is generating the bill of IT. I think we've heard this already a couple of times today. And it helps understanding how weaknesses and vulnerabilities along application or technical architecture translate into impacts to business performance and the ability to generate business value. Again, facilitating discussion and conversation between IT and the business in such situations. One way of doing this would be through, for instance, identification of redundancies and variations in processes and applications. Market data management, as you can see here on the left side, was one of the capabilities that had been identified as critical in the processing area. Ideally, there should be a single IT solution providing the support for all the different market products pertaining to this capability. The redundancies that we can see here are indicative for, on the one hand, incomplete merger and acquisition activities or undesired process breakdowns. The non-alignment situations that we see are indicative that process variations apply across these different product markets, and they may not actually be offset by the incremental value generation that are associated with these variations. In a third perspective, the capability prioritization can further be used to determine which capabilities are suitable for the adoption of service-oriented architecture. That means which capabilities will benefit from agility in IT support directly, in the sense that they can translate this directly into market differentiation. Examples are shown in brown color on this chart. Secondly, which capabilities are candidates for the implementation of commercial off-the-shelf software packages, as the focus for these capabilities is more on cost efficiency, lean processing, or staying at par with the benchmarks from competitors. Bob had mentioned an example of Fidelity earlier. That clearly goes into the area of standardization, and this is exemplified with the green patches on this chart. And then thirdly, we may also scout out for candidates constituting outsourcing potential as co-opetitors, meaning companies that are operating in the same market may provide for better economies of scale. And these examples are shown in pink color in this chart. Taking it to the level of cost, associating the IT cost with the business capabilities facilitates discussion with the business peers. Bobby had already highlighted this, as the business peers obviously can readily relate to the business value that is derived from the individual capability. So like in the example shown here, obviously numbers are skewed somewhat, but the example still shows that a small number of capabilities is actually taking the larger share of the cost. Further separating between run and change cost, meaning operational expenses and capital investments, helps taking the right conclusions in the sense, should I be looking at rationalizing my project portfolio, or should I be scouting for application and technology rationalization or outsourcing options? With this now, I'm turning to the example of the telecommunications service provider. The first observation we are making here is that this company has opted for a much more detailed definition of the capability map, going up to 7 levels deep. Secondly, the capability map is actually an assembly from different sources, from an internal domain model for the first 2 levels, the ETOM and ITIL standard for level 3, and then the Microsoft Service Business Architecture Library for the levels 4 and onwards. The current projects are mapped to these capabilities to trace dependencies. And then the customer has adopted a methodology developed by a consulting company, Argus Advisory, to conduct a needs analysis for business capabilities, which means understanding the requirements of the market and translating it into delivery capabilities and underlying IT support and service offerings. This assessment is conducted in a collaborative dialogue involving all the relevant stakeholders, such as sales and marketing, product management, IT operations, IT development. The delivery capabilities are assessed for the current and future state performance characteristics. And this is done in a multi-perspective approach, which results in a consolidated understanding of the capability gaps and in a mutually agreed set of capability hotspots which require improvement. The capabilities are here serving as a facilitator for understanding and reaching agreements. And this assessment then is further used to drive a demand management process, which helps consolidating the demands, identifying the subset of demands that is really worth pursuing, and at one observation period, this has actually resulted in a reduction of demands by 80%, meaning 80% of demands had turned out to be not strategically relevant and shouldn't be pursued, at least at the current point in time. And thus, this obviously focuses attention and the activity for the entire organization. With this, I'd like to wrap up the presentation slowly here. I hope and trust that you've been able to follow how the answers to these 5 critical questions that Bobby had laid out during his presentation can be derived using business capability management, and how business capability as a notion serves as the Rosetta Stone between business IT to facilitate these conversations. I'd like to conclude my presentation here with spending a few words on Alphabet. Our core competence is IT business management, and we've been doing this for more than 10 years now. During that time, we have gained insight and experience in best practice IT management and planning processes, where business capability management is just one example. We are operating as an enterprise software solution vendor in US, Europe, and Asia Pac, and with our solutions serve IT organizations and their business peers in large and mid-sized corporations with currently a compound user community of more than 25,000. At this point, I'd like to turn to some of the questions that I trust we have received during the discussion here. And Sarah, can you please pick it up?
Yeah, we have a number of questions that have come in on the chat line. And this first question goes to Bobby. To what level of detail should a capability map go to be able to derive benefit from it?
The $60 million question, maybe, if we take that old adage and put a couple extra zeros behind it. The examples that you saw that Uli gave showed one company that drove down to 7 levels of detail. That's more detail than most firms I've seen do in the capability model. What I mean by that is that once you get down to a really discrete level, you're starting to shift over to a process point of view, and it's hard to have more abstract conversations with that much detail. So really down a couple of layers is adequate to generate significant value. And just to help emphasize that, there's a UK-based investment firm that actually built out its own capability modeling tool to help the companies that it was pulling together, doing mergers with, help them do the analysis of, okay, so where's the redundancy? Where do we need to go into the depth of many layers down below to see how compatible we really are? But without a high-level model that shows the kind of analysis that we've walked through today, you really can't quickly identify where you need to have the detailed project. So it really doesn't have to be more than a couple of layers.
Okay, here's another question for you, Bobby. How are business capability maps different from the functional decomposition models that have been used over the past 20 years?
Well, functional decomp and business process analysis and all of these approaches which reflect drilling down to the detail are typically designed to be able to get us into the levels of understanding of functionality that allow us to deploy or write and then deploy the software. The interesting thing about capability models is they are not, if we take language from set theory, they are not supersets of functions and processes. They are animals that reflect how the business wants to operate. Some companies, haven't codified many of the processes and functions in in a core capability, for instance. So you can have a capability map with no technology, none of the functional decomp that's required to roll out an application, but you can build out a map. Now, of course, the technology layer will be pretty thin to empty in the example I was just giving, but the point is that the detail you get in functional decomp or process modeling associated with defining a solution goes to a great deal of detail, and it tries to create a proper universe of understanding of what functionality is required, maybe priorities of the various pieces of functionality, so you can lay out a roadmap for automation. The capability map would have been a tool used prior to having done that to identify, as we've described, overlaps, redundancy, holes, opportunities for abstraction through SOA, any of those kinds of conversations which occur before you go through the process of doing the detailed functional decomp.
Okay, Uli, we have a question for you. From the two customer examples you give, who in the company initiated the capability approach?
Interesting question, thanks. Both actually were driven by business initiatives. In case of the bank, business had initiated a revision of the business model aiming at more integration across the silos of the bank. Obviously, being a bank and being so dependent on IT, this very fast trickled into the core of the IT organization, and the bulk of conversation that we've been involved in obviously was carried out with the IT organization. In the second case, the telecommunication service provider, it was also a revision or revisiting of the business model to understand which capabilities are going to continue to be viable for us, which business capabilities should we get perhaps rid of, and which new business capabilities may we want to embark on because they are constituting new opportunities in the context of telecommunications market, shifting from a infrastructure service provisioning model to a more content-driven service provisioning model. So both initiatives had been initiated from the business side of the house, and the IT has been the main player to roll this activity onwards.
Okay, Bobby, another question for you. What relationships do you make between business capability and service SOA style?
Well, if you look at some of the pictures that we've laid out for you, particularly the detailed versions that Julie showed, you start to see where a given activity or set of activities interface with a bunch of other activities. And it gives you then a way to start to analyze what class of SOA interface you need to roll out. So specifically, if you got some core capabilities that the firm has, and you're breaking those into, let's say, into looking at the functional breakdown, and you start to see a repetition of that function across multiple groups, opportunity for a shared service. If you've got a shared service in place, excellent opportunity to wrap the functions in that service or the process interfaces that are part of delivering that service, wrap those in a SOA layer to abstract them. Same point could be made about outsourcing or partnering for delivery of those services and capabilities. So you just start to identify opportunities for reuse and start to see some of the boundaries at a high level, even before you go do the detailed analysis at a high level, and then from there can do the hard work of figuring out exactly what would what would the payback or reuse be. But the models allow you to see those interfaces, see duplication of use, see where there are opportunities to change sourcing strategies, etc.
Okay, Uli has a question for you. What tools exist to support the recording of information for analysis? What tools exist to help with the analysis? Okay,
I mean, obviously, Planning IT is a great tool doing this. though I want to start answering this with a little bit of a different spin. In our experience, companies start off doing this kind of off the bat using Microsoft Office based tools. So yes, using Excel, coming up with business capability lists and business capability structures in Excel, perhaps even doing the initial performance assessment in Microsoft Excel. But the moment it starts moving into a more collaborative type of scheme, they very quickly understand that Excel is not the right premise doing this, and they look for professional type of tools, and that's how, in most cases, we are getting into the game, providing the ability to capture information in a distributed fashion, still be able to support workshop type of assemblies of multiple stakeholders that can discuss about specific aspects, and record their findings as they are discussing online, making sure that this is shared with anyone else in the globally distributed community, and so on. And yes, the analysis part is as equally important as the documentation part. So there's a great deal of reporting capabilities that we are providing with Planning IT, and a good amount of configuration capabilities that allow customers to define their own reporting capabilities based on the needs that they have.
Okay, and this I think is probably our last question to Bobby. How many companies are actually doing capability mapping, and with what success?
We have yet to go into the market into the field with this survey that I think gets at the real core answer to this, and the reason is that there is there's a level of complexity in the question. So to the very first comments I made about the definition of the term, if we go out and say, are you doing capability mapping, only people familiar with that term in that use would be able to give us the right answer. So I'll give you my gut sense, and Uli, I'd be curious what yours is. I think it's probably in the 10 to 12% right now who are doing the kind of structure we're talking about. But to Uli's point, just in his answer just a second ago, there are lots of people who've got pieces of the puzzle in place. So probably maybe 25 or 30% of companies have some elements of this in place. They just haven't pulled the whole piece together. Uli, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think 10%, maybe 15% is probably the number that I would have come up with. And you're absolutely right. Companies have bits and pieces. They may not be going as consistent about the issue as we have discussed today during our presentation. But I believe any way starting into it is as good as any other, as long as the focus is on driving value into this business IT relationship through the notion of capabilities. And whether it's capabilities or some companies call it components and other companies call it domains, doesn't really make too much of a difference. It is this attitude of having a layer of language commonality between the business and IT camp that is relatively stable, catering for the stability needs of the IT, and close enough to value so that business doesn't just turn their back.
And I'll add one more thought to that. I know we're running over a little bit, and that thought is that this is an accelerating level of interest. What motivated me to start doing research on it a couple of years ago was that I started hearing more and more about it, and as I've dug into it, I see more and more interest. So I think we'll, like any launch of a new tool, a new approach, we're using the double knee market curve. We're in that first knee where there's early stage acceleration.
Okay, we are just about out of time, but one last question has come in for Uli. Do you know best practices concerning the level of detail to be achieved in modeling capabilities?
I think given that this is a pretty emerging subject, it may be a bit premature talking about best practices, but what we typically recommend to customers in that context is staying at 2 to 3 levels of granularity. As I said, telescoping is very helpful so that you don't get knocked down by the detail in areas that are not really relevant and of matter to you at this moment. Keeping this option open for later investigation and assessment. So 2 to 3 level is typically what we find.
Okay, great. We still have more questions, but unfortunately we're out of time now. So Uli, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Actually, I'd like to thank everyone on the call today, in particular, obviously, all the attendants, the good, interesting questions, the stimulating questions, and of course, Bobby, big thank you to you for joining us today in this conversation. It was a pleasure doing this with you. So thanks, everyone, and have a great day from Berlin.
Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's webinar. You may disconnect your lines at this time, and thank you all for your participation. Have a wonderful day.